Welcome to the Nikon Z-mount Complete Lens Guide. My name is John Gringo, and this is going to be a class for all you Nikon users who want a complete tutorial on everything to do with lenses, with a special focus on the Nikon Z-mount system and all of their lenses. This is, it's much more than just a rundown of the different lenses that are available. We're going to be going through all the technical information on these lenses. We're going to be talking about how to use them, how to choose them, everything that you would want to know about lenses. This is going to be a very in-depth class. It is designed for a variety of levels of users. I realize that there are going to be some people who are coming here that have just got their first interchangeable lens Nikon camera and they want to learn about lenses, and it's great to have you here. I'm going to cover a lot of the basics in here. I know some of you are retired, you've been doing photography for decades, you know a lot of stuff about photography. Well, I've dug pretty deep into this class to get you as much information as possible, so there are lots of more advanced nuggets in here for everyone. So a little something for everyone. I think it's going to be a great class. I'm really excited about this because I've used Nikon gear since the very beginning, and they've done such a great job with lenses. There's a lot of fun things to talk about in here. Now, when it comes to photography and lenses, one of the great things about photography is the versatility of all the things that you can do with photography. And part of that versatility comes down to the interchangeable lens factor, that you can put on a different lens and really create a unique capturing device specifically designed for different types of subjects and different types of agendas that you might have. Now, you don't need to own all of the lenses. While that might be kind of fun, you need just a few lenses that get what you want done. And it's a matter of really finding those particular lenses and getting them set right for what you're doing. And so choosing the right lenses is going to be a matter of knowing what sort of subject you want to shoot, what are your goals, and what sort of style do you have. There are lots of lenses that are designed for specific purposes, but you don't have to use them for that. You can use them for other things. But it's good to know what they're designed for, because if you do want to do that, that's probably your first choice of lens. And so there's a lot of different things that are going on here, and I think this is what makes photography so much fun for me. I've owned a few fixed lens cameras in the past, but I really enjoy the interchangeable lenses because they just give you so many options in what you can do. All right, so the goal of this class is to give you a complete education on lenses. If I was a professor at a university, the course that you are about to see here would be the exact course that I would teach to students who were getting a degree in photography, photojournalism, the arts of photography, or anything like that. I might change the name and call it the art and science of optical lenses, with a focus on Nikon Z-mount lenses. And so that's one of the tweaks about this class, is we're really going to be focusing on Nikon lenses. There's a lot of things that are just core lens technology that we'll be talking about, but then a whole other section dealing specifically with how Nikon makes their Z-mount lenses and what some of their options are available. So you're going to learn what the lenses do, which that's kind of the simple part of it, but how they can solve certain photographic problems, how you can become more creative with the use of the different lenses. And this is going to be a really good guide for anyone who is trying to learn which lenses they need and how to get the most out of them, with, as I say, a special focus on Nikon lenses. Now, there is one thing that this class is not, and I just want to mention that, is this class isn't a traditional lens review. I know lens reviews are a very popular thing to do out there, and the fact of the matter is you can pick any Nikon lens you want, and you can go find probably 20 to 100 different reviews about that particular lens. And so we're not going to go through each lens and talk about how much barrel distortion it has and how much chromatic aberration it has at aperture f13. We're going to talk about a lot of those things, but not going through each lens in that manner. This is more an education on lenses, not just a review of how good or bad one particular lens is. Now, when it comes to the Nikon Z-mount lineup, at least as of the recording of this class, we've got a little over 40 lenses currently available. Now, I have been patiently waiting to do this class for the last several years. The Z-mount was introduced several years ago at this point, and I can't do a lens class with 3 lenses. They need to have more lenses. And so each year Nikon has been bringing out a pretty healthy number of lenses, and they finally got to a point where they have enough lenses that we've got enough to sink our teeth into for this class, which is what I wanted. Now, I know they're going to come out with some more lenses, and there's going to be some kind of fun and interesting things that are coming down the pike. I have no special knowledge with Nikon. I'm not paid by Nikon. I don't work for Nikon. I have to buy all my stuff myself. I don't get anything free from Nikon. So there's no affiliation. I'm completely independent from Nikon. So what I say is my true opinion from shooting with Nikon for decades. But I know that they're going to come up with new lenses down the road, and that's fine. The education that I want to provide you here is going to provide you with all the knowledge that you need that you can apply to any future lens that might come out. And so it's great that new lenses are going to come out, and some of these lenses are going to get replaced in time with newer, better versions. That's all really good. When you're done with this class, you're going to know how to understand all of that. Now, part of the purchase of the full download of this class is a couple of little extra printable pieces here. The first one is the class notes, and this keeps getting thicker with each class I do. This is a lot of the visuals. Those of you who haven't seen me before, don't know anything about me, I'm a very visual teacher. I like to show you things on screen, how they work before and after, lots of examples. I do lots of graphs and animations. And I've taken some of the most important elements and I've put them in here, added a little bit of text that may not be in the actual recorded class, but just in the PDF here. And so there's all sorts of information, technical about the Nikon lenses and lenses in general, recommendations and so forth. And so this is something that you can view online, you can print off if you want. Now, what I don't have in here is any real technical information on the lenses. That changes a little bit more frequently, and I've decided to put that together in the lens data sheet here. And what I've done here is I have gone through, and I am a bit of a nerd when it comes to this, and I go to Nikon's website and I pull off all the information about their lenses. But they don't put everything down, and that bothers me because I have to go to other people's website that have reviewed and checked out the lens, and then I have to go get my hands on the lens itself to actually see how something works or not. And so there's technical information, size, weight, some of those basic things in there, but I also want to know, is it an internal zoom? Is it internal focus? What year was it introduced? Most people don't include that. What's the price of it? I know that changes and so forth, but just to give you a ballpark figure of where things are. And so this kind of gives you a full listing of all the lenses and all the technical information you would want. So these are things that you can view when you get the full downloadable version of the class. You can view them online or you can print them off. I think they can be really handy if you want to help compare, figure out which lens is next best for you. All right, folks, time to get into the lenses. So Nikon is one of my favorite manufacturers out there because they really take a lot of pride in their lenses. They have a fantastic lens development program and lens manufacturing facility. Now, obviously, when they create a lens, they have an intention with the lens of what that lens might be used for. Want to address a particular need. And that's great. If you have a particular need for something, I can probably point you in the direction of here is a lens that addresses that need. And then if you don't have enough money for that lens, well, here's an alternate version. And so they're going to make 2 or 3 different versions for each different aspect that you might want to do in photography. And so that's the first direction to go to. But once you get really good at that, you might want to try something a little different and shoot your subject in a different way. And that's when you can start trying some of the different lenses. And so it's good to know what their intention is, but it's good to know what's capable of the lens so that you know how to adapt that lens for whatever it is that you want to do. Now, when selecting lenses, the primary characteristics that are most important is number 1, the lens mount. You want to know that it fits on your camera and works properly. Number 2, close to number 1 in importance, is the angle of view. What is the purpose of the lens? What are you trying to do? What are you going to see with the lens? And next up is the maximum aperture. Tell me those three things about a lens and I will tell you all sorts of things about that particular lens. Now, there are some other things that you're going to want to look at. And so some of the most important secondary characteristics is, how good is the image quality? Sneak peek for pretty much all the Z-mount lenses we're talking about, they're all really good. Some might be a little bit better than others, but for the most part, it's all very good these days. There are a variety of features. We're going to be going through that in one of the upcoming sections. And then there's physical characteristics about how big and heavy the lens is. Is it going to work for hand holding? Is it going to fit in your backpack? Is it going to fit in your shoulder bag? Those are some other things that are good to know, and we'll be talking about that as we go through the class. Now, with their lenses, we've got prime lenses and we have zoom lenses that vary in their focal length. You're going to see the focal length and you're going to see the maximum aperture printed right on the top of the lens where it's really easy to see because this is the most important information. So that is kind of the name of the lens, the most important aspect. But you're also going to see when you look at the front of the lens or somewhere else on the lens, a lot of other information. And Nikon has had a chance to reset themselves going from the F-mount to the Z-mount, and they have restrained themselves with the number of letters and designations that they are putting on their lenses. They've really tried to clean up their game because they've been adding more and more letters all the time. And they're very restrained at this time as to all the different acronyms and things that they put on the lens, but they put them on there for a reason. Everything on your lens is very well-intentioned, and we're going to be looking very closely at every aspect of all of these different features that you see on the lens. Now, when Nikon lists a lens, it's often listed in this manner with the lens mount, the focal length, the maximum aperture, and then some letters which indicate which grade or particular name or features it has. Now, because I'm doing things digitally on screen and I have kind of limited space and I'm comparing lenses one next to each other, I needed to reorganize things slightly. So I'm dropping off the NIKKOR, more about that on the next slide, and we're just going to call them Z-mount, focal length, maximum aperture, and then I'm going to put all the letters down below at the end. Nikon has had a bad reputation. Trust me, only a nerd like myself would notice this. They moved some of the letters around depending on the lens, and it got a little unorganized, shall we say, back in the F-mount days. And it's gotten a little bit better here, but any of those extra features will be listed on that bottom line. All right, little Nikon history here. We've got Nikon and NIKKOR because all of your lenses are actually NIKKOR lenses. Well, what does that mean? Are they Nikon lenses or are they NIKKOR lenses? Well, Nikon is a company that makes cameras and lenses and a whole bunch of other stuff. And so your lenses were made by Nikon, but NIKKOR is the brand of lens. And the funny thing is that NIKKOR, the name, is older than Nikon, the name. All right? So NIKKOR came about in 1932. Nikon didn't really exist until 1946. And this all goes back to the origins of the Nikon company. It was not started as the Nikon lens company or Nikon camera company. It was the Nippon Kogaku KK. Now, Nippon is Japan. Kogaku is basically optical, and KK is the Japanese way of writing corporation or company or formation of something like that. And so it's essentially the Japan Optical Company, and it was the formation of three other companies that combined together. And so they started making lenses and various optical devices in the very early days. And then they decided to come out with some microscopes, and they kind of took the letters from the name of their company, their Japan Optical Company, and they go, let's go NIKKO. And that means it's a microscope from our company. And that was their designation. And then when it came time to make lenses for cameras, they decided to just simply add an R. Now, whether this was for rangefinder cameras that they were making lenses for, or reflex cameras, which were kind of the next thing on the horizon, or somebody just liked the letter R or the letter P didn't sound right, I don't know. But that's where the word NIKKOR comes from. And so this Nippon Kogaku company was making NIKKOR lenses, and then they made a Nikon camera. There's like a Canon camera, and that was kind of a common way of taking some letters and adding an O in, and that's how you make your camera name. And then many, many years later, they actually went back and changed the name of their company to Nikon. And so It kind of moved around a little bit before those names settled in. Now, a little bit about Nikon's history. They started back in 1917. They started making optical devices, lenses. This was in 1933. It was an aerial photography lens as one of their first lenses that they produced. They didn't start making cameras until 1948, so well after they were established as a company. Now, this is kind of strange to list this event in 1950 as an article in the New York Times as an important part of Nikon history. And for you young folks out there, these newspapers were the internet of the day. And there was a very respected photographer who was quoted as saying that Nikon is superior to German brand cameras. And this was revolutionary because at the time, Japan was coming out of World War II, and they were making cheap trinkets and cheap electronics, and they weren't known for very good things. And now they were making really good cameras. And so this really burst them onto the scene, and they became very popular. And in 1959, they introduced their F-mount SLR camera, and this brought forth the Nikon F-mount lenses that we still have around today, right now. You can go into stores and buy F-mount lenses. Granted, they're not making them new anymore as far as I can tell, but they had a good 60, 70-year run or so on this F-mount lenses, and we'll talk a lot about those as we go through this class. They transitioned them along the way. 1986, they came out with autofocus. They played around with a smaller format system called APS, and then they got into digital, and then they tried their hand at mirrorless in 2011 with a very small format mirrorless system, but they learned a lot of lessons that they would then apply to their full-frame mirrorless system introduced in 2018, and then a cropped version in 2019. And so they've had a lot of different lens mounts over the years, you might say, but the F-mount has been a huge part of their history, and now it's clear the Z-mount is where they currently are and where they are going. Now, when it comes to the lenses that Nikon has made, they're NIKKOR lenses. They've made a lot of world's first when it comes to different types of lenses, whether it's the fastest lens or the widest lens, or a lens that had never been made like a 300 2.8 lens or a 6mm fisheye lens. They've made a lot of breakthrough lenses over the years. So they are definitely one of the hallmark manufacturers in the world of creating new and very, very special lenses. And this is just kind of a very short list of some of the highlights from the Nikon lens lineup. So understanding where the Z-mount is today, you really have to understand a little bit about the F-mount that came before it. I list 1959 as the birth date of it because that's when the Nikon F and the F-mount was introduced. I'm listing 2020 as the last date on the range of it because that's the last date that I have at this point in time of any new cameras or lenses coming out using that system. And so the 120 to 300 was the last lens that they've ever produced for the F-mount system. Now it's possible down the road they can go retro and come out with some new lenses for it, but I think they've moved on with the Z-mount. And so this system was so popular, it was my first interchangeable system because it's what all the other pros were using. It was high quality, there was tons of lenses. If you went to a newspaper and they had pool equipment, it was probably going to be a Nikon because that's what all the pros shot. It was well supported, you could get repairs done, you could buy new equipment all over the world. It's exactly what a photographer like me wanted. High quality, versatile, very adaptable. And they made a ton of great lenses. Now, one other thing about Nikon is that they were constantly evolving what it meant to be an F-mount. The cameras changed, the lenses changed, and they started making changes. And after enough changes, the newest lenses would not work on the oldest cameras and vice versa. But they were keeping up with the times with modern technology. And so there's a lot of different series of F-mount lenses. F-mount lens spans a huge number of years and a lot of different technology. So the original lenses were not called A lenses. They were called that only in retrospect because it was the first generation. They added some auto indexing so the cameras would know what apertures the lens were set at. Then they had some control by the aperture, and then they had focusing by the camera, and they added some distance information, which helped with the flash system. Then they moved the bodies from the camera to the lens, and they became AFS lenses. And then they took the aperture ring off the lens. I mean, it's still an aperture in the lens, but the control was done on the cameras. And then rather than being mechanically controlled, it was electronically controlled in the E lenses. And so 360 different models of lenses over the various different decades, over 120 million lenses produced. And if you want to use these on your current Z-mount camera, well, generally speaking, you can to some degree. Now, it depends on how old the lens is as to how much you can do with it. The most current generation, you can control focus and exposure, and it works very well on your Z-mount camera. Go a little bit older, well, you can do metering, but no autofocus because the camera doesn't have a drive shaft, which runs a little drive shaft in the lens for focusing the lens. And you go back a little bit farther, you're not going to get metering, and then you go back far enough and just physically, no, it ain't going to work. At least with the Nikon FTZ adapter. It's possible that somebody else might make an adapter that you could use those very oldest lenses on it. So this is something we'll talk more about when we talk about adapting lenses and some of the technology that is in these lenses. So to understand the Z-mount, you need to understand the F-mount a little bit. The F-mount was revolutionary at its time. It was very, very good. It was well designed to last decades. One of the problems, though, was that it had a relatively small opening, a small throat, you might say, for getting back into the image area, the film or the digital sensor of the camera. Now, this was good that it was small because then you could have smaller size lenses, cameras could be smaller, and everything could be a little bit smaller, and size was very important. But having a larger size diameter allows more light to get into that sensor, which allows you more options when it comes to the design of a lens. And so Nikon said, we're going big. And so from 44 to 55, that is a big change. That may not seem like a lot, it's only 11 millimeters, but in the photography world, that is a big lens mount. In fact, it is the biggest lens mount of any of the full frame cameras out available today. Now, the other thing they did is they didn't have to have this deep recess where they had a mirror in the camera. They were able to position the sensor much closer to the mount of the camera. And the closer you get it to the mount, well, that just gives you more freedom with designing the lenses. It also gives you a little bit more potential for designing smaller cameras if that's your thing, or it gives you more room behind it for more cooling or other things that you can do. But it generally gives the designers more to work with by having a very short flange distance in there. So with this big change in the mount system, this is something they talked a lot about when they introduced the new camera, and these are some of the benefits that you can get with this mount system. All right, well, how does this work in the real world? How much of a benefit is this new Z-mount? Well, I think we can look at one of the most important lenses in any system is the 24-70 f2.8 lens. This is a good general purpose zoom lens. Fast aperture on it. This is something a lot of professionals and serious photographers use as kind of their base lens on their camera for a lot of general work. With the F-mount, when we go to the Z-mount, they were able to make it 20% shorter and 25% less weight. And that is a pretty significant change. That makes that Z-mount lens a lot easier to fit in a lot of camera bags than the F-mount lens. And so that's as direct a comparison as to the improvements. Now, the big change that I think I've seen going from the F-mount to the Z-mount is just an overall image quality average of all the different lenses has just taken a significant step up. The worst Z-mount lens is a great lens these days. And that couldn't have always been said about the F-mount lenses. That changed over time. But they eventually got very good, and the best of the F-mount lenses are excellent. But now the Z-mount lenses, even a base Z-mount can be better than the best F-mount lens that was ever designed, just because the designers have so much more to work with and so much more freedom in how they design their lenses. The Nikon engineers take a lot into consideration. Everything on a lens is thought about. Just speaking to the rings on the lens, the focus ring, the zoom ring if it has it, and a control ring if it has it. I was reading an article about the lenses from the designer's point of view, and they go through back and forth in different mock-ups about choosing which location. How much friction do we want to have on this one versus the other ring? The exact materials that are being used. Yes, there's a rubber material being used, but I've heard of older stories of Nikon lenses that had a special rubber that when dealt with photographic chemicals, they did not corrode or degrade in any way when they were used with them. And so they are very thoughtful about all the different things that photographers do and what might get on their lens. Even the pixel width and the groove shape is carefully considered. They want it to look good. They want it to feel slightly different when you go from one ring to the next. And so they're really thinking about all the different details. And I love getting into that because it really makes you appreciate your lenses a little bit more. And I think that's a good thing in photography. All right, so the Z-mount system was introduced in August of 2018. They came out with two cameras, the Z6 and the Z7, and a whopping 3 lenses. And most importantly, they came out with an FTZ adapter, which allowed you to mount F-mount lenses to the Z-mount camera. And unlike a lot of adapters that were around from third-party manufacturers for a variety of systems out there, this one worked really well. It was very seamless. And so if you wanted to hook up an F-mount lens to your new Z-mount camera, it worked really, really well. And there was very few, if anything, as far as the features in your camera that would not work. And so it was a very seamless transition for those who wanted to get into the new cameras, and Nikon just didn't make a lens that was really important to them. They could just adapt it with a singular FTZ adapter that didn't cost too much money, had no optics in it, so it was the same optical quality as whatever lens they were putting on. So a year after this, they introduced another new system. Well, you might say it's a subsystem, and this is the DX, or this is the cropped frame version of the Z-mount. So it's got the same Z-mount lens mount on there, but they have different lenses that are designed for this particular system. But you can also use the regular Z lenses on there as well, but they just have a few of these extra DX lenses, and we'll talk a lot more about it later on in this class. So your standard Z-mount camera with its full FX sensor, which is a full frame sensor, same size as 35 millimeter. We have Z lenses that fit on. This is the main system that we're going to be talking about for this class. But we are also going to be talking about the DX system that Nikon makes, which is a smaller size sensor. And they do have lenses that are designed to project light onto that smaller size sensor a little bit more efficiently, you might say, and without all the extra overlap you might get with a Z lens on it. And so we're going to be talking about both of these. Now they share the exact same Z mount on the camera itself. They can both use full Z lenses on there. But the sensor size is notably different. The FX stands for the full frame, and this is terms that Nikon has used. And I think D originally stood for digital because when Nikon went digital, they didn't have full frame digital. They had a cropped, this was their digital format until several years in, until they finally went full frame with their system. Now, this smaller size sensor is smaller by about 1.5. We call it a 1.5 crop factor. If you want to get really technical about it, it's 1.49, but we're going to kind of just round it up to 1.5 for simplicity case in this particular class. And we'll be talking more about these two different systems as we go along in the class. Now, when you look at these lenses, whether they're listed at Nikon's website or some other reseller of them, you're going to see Z lenses, and it doesn't say FX. But if it doesn't say FX, it is FX. If it says DX, it's DX, which means it's for the smaller size sensor. And so you'll actually see on the lenses, they'll say DX, but the FX lenses won't say FX on them. But when you look in the technical information as far as the format, it will list FX in there. And I know this might be confusing to somebody who is brand new to photography, but this is what we've been dealing with for a couple of decades now. So it's pretty common to those of us who've been around the photography block. Now, the terminology that you see on the lenses, well, that's kind of special stuff because I'm sure there is long debates in the conference room about who gets a letter, whose division gets a letter Does the focusing group get a special letter to indicate that they're doing something special with their focusing system, or the optical group, or some other feature that's going on in the lens? And Nikon had a lot of acronyms back in the F-mount days. They kept on adding things because we're talking about close to 70 years of adding new technology, and they want to promote their new technology, so they give it a little letter or a series of letters. And the name gets longer and longer and longer. And when Z-mount came out, they kind of wiped everything across the board and said, all right, we're starting fresh, no letters. Well, okay, we'll have a couple of letters. Okay, we'll have a few letters. And so they've been a little bit more restrained here in the Z-mount days with how many letters they're adding on to designate various features and technologies. But as much as I give them a hard time about all the letters, I kind of like them because they let you know what's going on in the lens. And that's actually a really important part about this class, is what is the technology? What are the features in the lens? We're going to be going through all of this, so I'm not going to try to describe all of these things here. But all of these are describing different categories and parts of the lens and what's going on, features it might have, technology it might be offering in there. Some of these things are things that you can turn on and off. Some of these things really don't matter to you as a day-to-day photographer. They're not going to change the way they shoot, but it helps you appreciate all the work that goes into these lenses, which I really consider magic in many ways. And so this is all important information in this class, and these are the different sections of the class that I will be discussing this various information in. So we are going to be covering every one of these details. Now, how many of these are going to change the way that you shoot? I don't know, maybe half of them. Which half? I don't know. Guess we're going to have to find out. All right, so we've got two systems. We got the FX system and the DX system. And I'm going to, generally speaking, for a lot of the class, whenever I have slides up, if I'm doing both on one slide, I'm going to try to keep the FX on the left side and the DX on the right side, which is why I have the little letters out there so that you can see them. So that we can kind of keep things straight and you can kind of keep aware of what your system is. I imagine most of you are FX users because you have full frame cameras, and that's what Nikon's primary push is in their full frame cameras and their full frame lenses. The DX is kind of their starter system and some other interesting items, people who are interested in something a little bit smaller, a little bit lighter weight, maybe a little bit less money. We don't have to look any further than just the number of products that they make. When we look at the full frame lenses, there are many times more full frame lenses than there are crop frame lenses. And that's just because that is where the market is at this point in time. If people are into photography, they're kind of serious and they've got some money to invest in very good quality gear. And full frame is where Nikon is really putting their best resources, you might say. Now, when it comes to lenses, Nikon decided, okay, we're not going to have too many categories. It's going to be really simple. We're going to have base Nikon level lenses, and then we're going to have the higher quality S-line lenses. And S can stand for superior or special or sophisticated. They're not too particular about it. It's just their branding for their higher quality lenses that meet a higher quality standard in optical quality and in some other ways. Now, while Nikon has said that this is the official, there are 2 grades of lenses, I actually see 7 because I look really closely at lenses, and potentially an 8th. But for now, we're just going to do 7 levels of lenses. I'll talk more about these as we get into the class, but here's a quick preview of the 7 different levels of Nikon lenses. All right, the base ones, the most basic of the base ones, have a plastic lens mount, and these are going to be relatively lower end weight and prices on these. They then have metal mount lenses, and then they have some that are just notably faster that have a different lineage as far as who's making the lens and some other interesting things in the industry that we're going to get into more into those lenses a little bit later on. And then we get into the S line. It's not just simply one line as far as I'm concerned. There's the base line, which all have very good image quality, and that's nice. But there are ones that definitely have more features. There's displays and custom function buttons on them that give you a little bit more, and so I consider those the featured ones. And then there is the gold series. Now these have a gold stripe around the front, and they feature some sort of exotic feature or technology to them. Right now, all of these gold series ones are fairly long telephoto lenses, and we'll get into why they have that gold ring a little bit later on. And the final grade of the S-line lenses is what I call their signature series, which is their top in the class lens. And they've got a couple of these out now, and I have a feeling they're going to bring out a few more in the future. But this is where their lens designers get to exercise all of their abilities. What if we build the absolute best and we didn't care what it cost? It'd be really expensive. We're going to do it anyway. And that's what these signature lenses are all about, is providing the absolute pinnacle of performance. And so those are the 7 levels. What is the potential 8th level? Nikon makes some special edition lenses, but they're actually the cheap plastic basic Nikon ones with a different design to them. They aren't any better, they're not any worse, they just look different. And so that's a potential 8th category. So you thought there was 2, but maybe there's 7, maybe there's 8. All right, when it comes to selecting lenses, the focal length of the lens is usually the most important factor as to why you would choose one lens or another lens, or what you're going to be doing with that lens. This is what you see with a 50mm lens when viewed from above, as far as what you see from side to side. When you go with wide-angle lenses, obviously you get more from side to side with those wide-angle lenses. Now, I like to kind of talk about lenses in certain increments. 50, 35, 24. Yeah, I know there's a 28, but we jump down to 24 because we're not going to discuss every single focal length. And then down to 16. And usually with other companies, it jumps from there down to 12 or 10 millimeters or something like that. Nikon right now only goes down to 14, so 14 and 16 are pretty close, but it's kind of getting shoved into that extra category there at the end, which is why those are kind of close and everything else is kind of evenly spaced. All right, we're going out the other direction for telephoto. We get a narrower and narrower angle of view, and our popular increments go up to 85, 200, 400, 800. There are many lenses that are in between these. They're perfectly fine, but this is just kind of the general gist of it. To make it simple to understand, going from wide angle to telephoto. Now these are the focal lengths with full frame lenses that you will see and what you will get. When you are working with a DX system, to get that same angle of view, there are slightly different numbers that you need because it is a different size sensor. And so we're going to be using different numbers to talk about the exact same thing. And so in some cases, rather than using numbers to explain what I'm talking about, I will sometimes use words like it's got a normal angle of view or a wide angle or a telephoto. And it doesn't matter what system you have, you know what I'm talking about when I do this. And to get a little bit more precise, I've given a little bit more precise names to each of these different traditional focal lengths. And so you will see these terms used throughout this class, and it doesn't matter which format system you have, whether you have something completely different than we're talking about here, you can kind of get an idea of what lenses we're talking about. And how does everything kind of line up with these? Well, I've put together a little graph, and this is in the class notes. And so you can see if I have a camera with this size of sensor and a lens about this, is it considered a wide or normal or modest wide, or exactly where does it fit in there? And these numbers are a little soft around the edge. You can kind of be a little flexible, whether it's in the normal or moderate wide. And so that's why some of those numbers might seem like, well, there's a gap here. Which one does it fall into? It's just general categorization of the lenses. So one of my favorite things to do is to use a variety of lenses to capture a single scene, to help show what the difference is between wide angle and telephoto. So with wide lenses, you get to see a lot from side to side. Everything is kind of pushed far away, and the foreground is really dominant, especially that road in there. As we go in a little bit closer with our normal wide angle lenses to our modest wide and back to our normal lens is referring to the perspective that we see. The relationship of the foreground to the background is very much the way human eyes would see the scene. Now we have two eyes and they scan back and forth, so it's unfair to compare camera lenses to eyes in some ways because they are different types of optical devices. But as far as the perspective of what does the power pole look like compared to the mount, this is the normal point of view. As we move into the telephoto lenses, we have a narrower angle of view and we have interesting things that happen when we go from wide angle to telephoto. Here you can see the compression of the telephone poles. It looks like they're relatively close together when they're actually probably 100 meters apart, one from the next. And so we're going to be going through more of these examples of different focal lengths to really explain about everything that they can do. This is just one to whet your appetite here in the introduction section. Now I do need to make a little bit of a disclaimer that for this class, I am trying to do the best job I can at teaching how various aspects of photography work. And while I do own a number of Nikon cameras, and I do own a number of Nikon lenses, I also shoot with a bunch of other stuff as well because I do classes and all sorts of stuff. And if I have a really good shot from another branded camera at 200 millimeters that really shows what 200 millimeter does, I'm putting that in the class because I'm doing a showcase of what a 200 millimeter lens can do. I'm not trying to show you optical quality of Nikon lenses. They're all really good, and actually they're kind of hard to tell by the time you get it into a presentation like this. And so I'm going to use a variety of examples, but I am always staying true to the concept that we're talking about. So if I'm talking about depth of field with an f2.8 lens on a full frame camera, I am using a full frame camera with a lens at f2.8 to do that. So I want to retain honest education, but I'm going to utilize all the materials that I have to do that education. Now I have rounded a few numbers for simplicity. I am a stickler for precision, like that crop of 1.9, 1.49, I'm going to round it up to 1.5. And so occasionally when we talk about hyperfocal distances and your exact focusing distances, yeah, I've rounded a few millimeters here and there, less, 1% or less, just to make a nice simple number so that the point and the education is clear and is easy to understand and it looks good on screen. So be aware if you're calculating things out and you think I'm 1/100% off, you don't need to write me a letter about it. I already know about it. And I also realize that this class is made on a particular day. And Nikon has come out with a bunch of new lenses, and I would bet really, really good money that they're going to come out with more lenses down the road. Even from when you're watching this, they're going to come out with more lenses, I don't know, next week, next month, or something like that. I wanted to make this class. I waited a number of years before they had a good collection. I feel like there's a lot that we can talk about and a lot of education that I can put forth at this point in time, and I don't want to wait an infinite amount of time to make this class. So we're going to make this class now. There's going to be new lenses that come out. I am not going to remake this entire class because they came out with one new lens. Okay, that's not the way this is going to work. If they come out with something that's really revolutionary and needs to be addressed, well, I will see about adding a section regarding that. No promises, but that is something that I would like to do. So stay tuned in case there are radical changes down the road. But I expect this class to be pretty good, solid education for Nikon Z-mount lenses for a long, long time into the future. All right, quick overview of what is going to be in the rest of this class here. Section 2, we're in section 1 right now. Section 2 after this is all about focal length. You thought we talked about it just a moment ago? That was nothing. We got a lot to talk about. A lot of examples of different types of photos that you can shoot with each one. I've got a brand new section I've never done in another class talking about wide-angle lenses, perspective distortion, and how wide-angle lenses really work and kind of the quirk and trick with them. And I think that's going to be a lot of fun to go through. But we're going to go through the full set of focal lengths that is available from Nikon, from wide angle to telephoto. We'll talk about how they can be used, what they're best for, how to make the most of them. And especially if you're into sports photography, I have something about subject zone that is not talked about in the industry very much that is really important to understand as to why long lenses are so important for sports photography, but also for wildlife photography as well. And as we go through this, we'll do a little lens comparison so that you can see how one lens compares to the next lens. The next section on aperture, this is once again more core photography information about the various aperture ranges, the different lenses that are available, why you would choose one over the other, where you want to set your aperture for different settings, a little bit on some other effects like the starburst effect, and then if you want to get a little more technical, I'm going to talk about how to set hyperfocal distance for the landscape photographers and scenic photographers that want everything in focus, and you've been wondering, how do I set focus for that? The next two sections, 4 and 5, are very much dedicated to Nikon systems. We're going to be talking about how Nikon designs lenses, and, okay, I'll be honest with you on this section, section 4. Section 4 is probably the least important section for taking better photos. This is the section that you would take on Lens Appreciation Day, when you just want to appreciate how great of lens you have and all that went into it. This is, I think, a very interesting class because it goes into what it takes to design a lens and all of the optical problems that they need to surmount. Optical problems that you might want to keep an eye out for because they can still be a problem even in the best of lenses. Nikon has added a number of features, and this is going to be the place where you find out what all those features are, how they work, where you want to have them set, when you want to turn them on, when you want to turn them off. The next few sections is the lens rundown. This is where we're going to go through each lens that is available in the system, talk a little bit about what it's for, what it has in it, what its best points are, and why it's maybe not so good for other types of purposes. We're going to be doing a lot of comparisons, and so you're thinking about this lens, and you're not sure what the pros and cons are of it. I'm going to take all the most popular competing models and really kind of pit them up against each other and talk a little bit about their best usages and which one would be best for different applications in there. So we did that for the FX Zoom. We're going to do it for the FX Prime, and in some of the cases, we're going to be comparing prime lenses with zoom lenses, which ones would be better for different types of applications. There's not a lot of DX lenses, and so we can talk about all of them in one single section. Macro lenses, well, those are just very different than everything else, and so, well, there's a lot to talk about in here, so macro lenses get their own section. We'll talk about the older F-mount lenses. We're not going to do a deep dive into each lens, but we're going to kind of talk about them in groups and in general, but if you are interested in using them, this will provide you with a lot more information. We also have a lot of non-Nikon lenses. We have other companies that make lenses that will fit straight onto the Nikon Z-mount, or maybe they'll fit on with an adapter. And we'll talk about the pros and cons of doing that. We have a section on the accessories. There's a lot of things that you can add to lenses to get the most out of them or to do new or different things. And this is where we'll have all that information. And then finally, in building a system, I'm going to be giving recommendations on different genre types, what lenses would be best and the compromises between them. I'm going to be giving you a bunch of recommended systems that I think would be good lens combinations for different people doing different types of work. And then a little bit of advice on buying and selling lenses, whether you're doing it new or used, things that I do and look for. All right, folks, there you go. That is what the Nikon Z-mount Complete Lens Guide is all about. It is going to be a complete education on photography lenses with a heavy focus on Nikon Z-mount lenses. It's going to be a great class. Glad you're here. Look forward to seeing you in the next section.